Hello everyone, don't miss out. Watch the full video till the end. Love knows no borders, but sometimes those borders are built by family, culture, and tradition. On Viva Flick M, we bring you one of the most dramatic journeys ever seen on reality television. The story of Jenny Slatin and Sumit Singh, a romance that began with hope, laughter, and dreams of forever, but ended in heartbreak, courtroom battles, and cultural divides. Jenny, an American woman, believed she had found her soulmate in Sumit, a young man from India. Their love was unconventional, their bond undeniable. Yet from the very beginning, Sumit's parents stood as an unmovable wall. They wanted their son to marry a younger Indian woman to carry on the family name and give them grandchildren. Jenny, with her independence and maturity, was never accepted. For 5 years, Jenny and Sumit fought against the odds. They whispered promises, shared dreams, and believed love could conquer tradition. But the relentless pressure of family expectations tore them apart. On January 15th, their marriage ended in divorce. Sumit chose duty, marrying another woman, while Jenny left India forever, broken but determined to survive. Tonight, we unravel the truth behind their saga, the love, the pain, and the choices that changed their lives forever. Jenny Slatin was a woman from America living a quiet life when fate introduced her to Sumit Singh, a young man from India. Their connection began online, a spark that quickly grew into something deeper. Despite the age gap, despite the distance, Jenny and Sumit found themselves drawn to each other's warmth and honesty. Jenny saw in Sumit a man who made her feel alive again, while Sumit admired Jenny's courage and independence. When Jenny first traveled to India, she believed she was stepping into a fairy tale. The bustling streets, the vibrant colors, the traditions, all of it felt overwhelming yet magical. But behind the magic, shadows were already forming. Sumit's family, deeply rooted in Indian tradition, could not accept Jenny. To them, she was too old, too foreign, and incapable of giving them what they valued most, grandchildren to carry on the Singh bloodline. Still, Jenny and Sumit fought for their love. They shared tender moments, whispered promises, and dreamed of building a life together. Jenny believed love could conquer all, while Sumit hoped his family would eventually understand. But every smile was followed by tension, every embrace shadowed by doubt. The whispers of disapproval grew louder, and the fairy tale began to crack. Jenny often said, "I don't want to live under anyone's control." For her, love meant freedom, partnership, and respect. Sumit, however, carried the weight of tradition. "This is our culture. We must take care of our parents," he reminded her. These words, though spoken with sincerity, became the seeds of conflict that would later destroy their bond. Jenny had imagined that love would be enough to silence the doubts. But in India, love was never just between two people. It was between families, traditions, and generations. From the very beginning, Sumit's parents made their stance clear. Jenny was not the woman they had envisioned for their son. To them, marriage was not only about companionship, but about duty. Duty to the family, duty to society, and duty to the future. The whispers of disapproval soon turned into direct confrontations. Jenny would sit quietly in the living room, listening as Sumit's parents spoke in sharp tones, questioning her age, her background, and her ability to give them grandchildren. Every word felt like a dagger cutting into her hope of being accepted. She tried to smile, tried to show respect, but inside she was breaking. Sumit, caught in the middle, struggled to balance the two worlds he loved. On one side was Jenny, the woman who gave him freedom, laughter, and a sense of individuality. On the other side was his family, who reminded him daily of his responsibility as a son. He would often repeat that they must take care of their parents. Jenny, however, could not understand why love had to be chained to obligation. She did not want to live under anyone's control. Her voice trembled with both anger and sadness whenever the topic returned. The cultural clash was not just about age or tradition. It was about identity. Jenny represented independence, a life where choices were made freely. Sumit represented heritage, a life where choices were guided by family honor. Their love became a battlefield where neither side could fully win. Nights turned heavy with silence. Jenny would cry alone, wondering if she had made a mistake by leaving her home in America. Sumit would sit beside her, holding her hand, promising that things would get better. But deep down, he knew the storm was only growing stronger. The Singh household was a place of tradition where every decision was measured against cultural expectations. For Sumit's parents, marriage was not simply about love. It was about lineage, respect, and the continuation of family honor. When Jenny entered their lives, she was seen not as a partner for their son, but as a disruption to everything they believed in. From the beginning, Sumit's parents voiced their disapproval. They wanted their son to marry a younger Indian woman, someone who could give them grandchildren and secure the family's future. Jenny, with her maturity and foreign background, represented the opposite of their dream. Conversations quickly turned into confrontations. Jenny would sit silently as Sumit's mother spoke with sharp words, questioning her role, her age, and her ability to fit into their family. Sumit's father, though calmer, was equally firm. He reminded his son that family comes first, that traditions cannot be broken, and that love without responsibility is meaningless. For Jenny, these words felt like chains. She had left her home in America to be with the man she loved, only to find herself judged and rejected at every turn. The resistance was relentless. Family gatherings became battlegrounds. Neighbors whispered, relatives criticized, and the pressure mounted. Jenny tried to win them over with kindness, cooking meals, learning customs, and showing respect. But no matter what she did, the wall of disapproval remained. Sumit was torn apart. He loved Jenny deeply, but he could not ignore his parents' pain. He would often sit with her late at night, holding her hand, whispering promises that someday things would change. Yet every morning, reality returned. His parents would never accept Jenny. Jenny's heart began to crack under the weight of rejection. She felt like an outsider in the very home she had hoped to belong to. The love story that once felt magical was now drowning in cultural resistance. Jenny had always believed that love could withstand any storm. She had crossed oceans, left behind her familiar life in America, and embraced a new culture for the sake of her relationship with Sumit Singh. But as the days turned into years, the constant rejection from Sumit's family slowly eroded her strength. As the days turned into years, the constant rejection from Sumit's family slowly eroded her strength. She stopped waking up excited for the morning because every sunrise felt like another test she had to pass inside a home that never truly felt like hers. Jenny would stare at the ceiling before getting out of bed, listening for the sounds in the apartment, trying to predict what kind of day it would be. Would it be one of the quiet days, where nobody said anything directly but the air still felt icy? Or would it be one of the days where a single comment, a single look, could turn the entire house into a war zone? She had crossed an ocean for love, but she was starting to realize that love in this situation came with a price tag she never agreed to pay. This is a dramatized, YouTube-style retelling built from the story you provided, told in a news documentary voice for maximum emotion and suspense. It's meant to feel cinematic, not like a legal transcript, and every scene is written to keep viewers hooked. Now, here's where the story takes a darker turn, because what happens next is not just about arguments and disapproval. It becomes about control, survival, and the moment Jenny realizes that waiting for acceptance can slowly kill the person you used to be. At first, Jenny told herself that patience was love. She told herself that if she kept showing kindness, if she stayed calm, if she respected their rules, the walls would eventually come down. She tried to learn the rhythm of their household, the tiny routines that meant everything to Sumit's parents. When to speak, when not to speak. What topics to avoid. How to dress to prevent side eyes. How to smile even when her throat felt tight. But the problem with living inside someone else's approval is that it never ends. The moment you give them one thing, they move the goalpost again. Jenny started noticing it in the smallest ways. A meal she cooked would be fine, but never good. A gesture she made would be nice, but never enough. And the biggest shadow hanging over everything was the one thing she could not change: her age, her nationality, and the fact that Sumit's parents believed their son's future had been stolen. Over time, Jenny's world got smaller. She stopped exploring the city like she did in the beginning. The bright colors of India, the sounds, the energy, the chaos that once felt magical, now felt like background noise to the tension waiting at home. She began measuring her days not by joy, but by conflict. She learned to read faces like a skill. She could tell by the way Sumit's mother placed a cup down on the table whether a storm was coming. She could tell by the way Sumit avoided eye contact whether he had just had another conversation with his parents about duty. And she could tell by the way Sumit's father grew quiet, how the silence wasn't peace. It was pressure, because in that house, quiet didn't mean calm. Quiet meant the argument was loading. And Sumit, caught in the center, was changing too. He still loved Jenny, but love alone wasn't protecting him anymore. He was constantly switching roles, like a man living two separate lives in one body. With Jenny, he was the romantic partner who promised freedom, who promised a future, who promised us against the world. With his parents, he was the obedient son who promised loyalty, who promised tradition, who promised, I will not break the family. Each promise canceled the other, and both sides could feel it. That's when the relationship started to rot from the inside, not because the love disappeared, but because the stress never stopped. It wasn't one big fight that destroyed them. It was 1,000 small moments that added up, like water dripping onto stone until the stone finally cracked. Jenny's friends back home would message her, asking if she was okay. Jenny would answer with short replies and emojis, trying to sound normal. She didn't want to admit how lonely she felt. She didn't want to admit that she was becoming someone she didn't recognize. Because loneliness hits different when you're surrounded by people who don't want you there. And it hits even harder when the person you love keeps saying, just a little longer. Just be patient. Jenny began to ask herself a question that haunted her at night. What if this is the rest of my life? Not a honeymoon. Not a fresh start. Just a permanent audition for a family that already decided they would never clap. And then, one night, something happened that changed the tone of everything. It wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was worse. It was a calm conversation where Jenny realized the truth. The kind of truth that doesn't scream, it whispers, and the whisper stays with you forever. It started after dinner, when the kitchen was quiet and the TV sound was low. Sumit sat next to Jenny, not looking at her directly. He had that face he got when he was about to say something heavy. Jenny could feel it before the words came out. She asked him what was wrong. He said nothing at first. Then he finally said, softly, they are worried. Jenny didn't even ask who they were, because she already knew. She asked, worried about what now? And Sumit paused, like he was weighing every syllable. They think we should think about the future, about the family. Jenny's stomach dropped. She had heard this song before. She said, Sumit, we are thinking about the future. That's why I'm here. Sumit swallowed, then said the line that always cut her deepest. This is our culture. We must take care of our parents. Jenny turned her head and looked at him. Not angry yet, just exhausted. Why does taking care of your parents always mean me giving up my life? She asked. Sumit tried to explain. He said it was expected. He said people would talk. He said his parents were old and needed support. He said he loved her, but he couldn't abandon them. Jenny listened, and for a moment she did something rare. She stopped arguing. She stopped fighting. She just stayed at him like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. And that's when the realization landed. Sumit wasn't choosing between Jenny and his parents. Sumit was choosing his parents and asking Jenny to accept it as love. He wanted Jenny to stay, but only in a way that didn't threaten the structure his parents demanded. Jenny felt a strange calm in her chest. The calm that happens when you finally accept what you've been refusing to see. She said, so where do I fit in? In your culture, in your duty, in your family. Sumit reached for her hand and said, you are my wife. Jenny pulled her hand back gently and said, then act like it. That moment didn't end their marriage overnight, but it planted the seed of the ending, because after that, Jenny stopped believing that time would fix things. She started believing that time was being used against her. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and the pressure got louder. The family conversations became more direct. Sumit's mother would bring up responsibility at random moments. She would say it while folding clothes. She would say it while serving tea. She would say it like she was talking about the weather. But Jenny knew it was a message. You are temporary. The family is permanent. Sometimes the mother would talk about grandchildren without looking at Jenny, as if Jenny wasn't even in the room. Other times, she would look straight at Jenny and ask questions that sounded polite but felt like knives. Are you happy here? Do you understand how things work? Do you think this is fair to him? Jenny learned that in that household, fair didn't mean fair to Jenny. It meant fair to everyone except Jenny. The relatives had opinions too. Neighbors too. The gossip wasn't even a secret anymore. Jenny felt it when she walked down the stairs. She felt it in the way people stared. She felt it in the way some women whispered and then looked away like they were innocent. She felt it in the way men glanced at Sumit, half judgmental, half curious, like he had done something scandalous that entertained them. And inside the home, the tension turned Jenny's body into a constant alarm. She would wake up with headaches. She would lose her appetite. She would cry quietly in the bathroom so nobody could hear her. Then she would wipe her face, put on a brave smile, and go back out like nothing happened. That's when you know you're in survival mode. When you start acting okay, not because you are okay, but because you're too tired to explain your pain to people who won't validate it anyway. Meanwhile, Sumit was breaking too, but in a different way. He started getting shorter with Jenny, not because he didn't love her, but because he was drowning and he didn't know how to breathe. He would disappear into conversations with his parents. He would come back drained, and Jenny would want answers. What did they say? What do they want? What did you say? Sumit would say things like, not now, Jenny. And those two words would set her off, because not now had become the theme of her entire life. Not now for peace. Not now for acceptance. Not now for a home. Not now for respect. Always later. Always someday. Always after the next compromise. Jenny began feeling a new emotion rise inside her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before: resentment. It wasn't just toward the parents. It was toward Sumit, because he kept asking her to fight a battle he wasn't willing to finish. He kept telling her, we will be okay, but he wouldn't draw a clear line with his family. And Jenny started to wonder if he ever would. That's when the arguments got sharper. Jenny would say, I don't want to live under anyone's control. Sumit would say, they are my parents. Jenny would say, I am your wife. Sumit would say, please understand. And every time he said, please understand, Jenny heard a different message. Please accept being second. The emotional distance between them grew, even when they were physically close. They would sit on the same couch, but feel like they were on opposite sides of a world. They would eat dinner together, but the conversation would feel forced, like two people trying not to trigger an explosion. Some nights, they would hold each other, and Jenny would feel the love still there. But love without protection is fragile. Love without loyalty is painful. Love without a future becomes a memory you're still living inside. And then came the turning point where the family pressure became something more serious, a decision. It began with a conversation that felt like a trap. Sumit told Jenny that his parents wanted to talk. Jenny's heart sank immediately, because those talks were never talks. They were verdicts. Still, Jenny agreed, because deep down she was still hoping for something, even if she hated herself for hoping. They sat together, the four of them, in a room that felt colder than usual. Sumit's mother spoke first. She said the family had suffered enough. She said people were talking too much. She said the household was not at peace. Sumit's father added that Sumit had responsibilities that could not be ignored. Then the mother said the word that changed everything: enough. She didn't say it like an opinion. She said it like a final stamp. Jenny looked at Sumit, waiting for him to defend their marriage with the full weight of his voice. Waiting for him to say, she is my wife, and this is not a debate. Instead, Sumit looked down, and Jenny felt the floor move under her. Because in that moment, she didn't just feel rejected by his family. She felt abandoned by the one person who was supposed to stand with her. Jenny tried to speak calmly. She said she had given up everything to be there. She said she loved Sumit. She said she wanted peace, but not at the cost of her dignity. Sumit's mother replied with something that sounded like concern, but carried a deep insult underneath. She said Jenny was older, and life is different. She said a man needs a family. She said Sumit deserves children, a legacy. Jenny felt her eyes burn, but she held her tears back. She said, "So what are you saying?" The mother didn't even hesitate. She said, "If he loves you, he can take care of you. But he must also do his duty." And duty, in that room, meant one thing: leaving Jenny behind emotionally, even if she remained in the home physically. Jenny looked at Sumit again. She asked him, "What do you want?" Sumit's mouth opened, then closed. He looked like a man being pulled apart. He whispered, "I don't want to lose you." Jenny said, "Then don't." And Sumit didn't answer. That silence was louder than any argument. After that day, Jenny's hope didn't die instantly. Hope is stubborn. It tries to survive. But it began fading fast, and every day after that felt like the slow walk toward an ending she didn't want but couldn't escape. She started thinking about America more. She started thinking about her old life, her friends, her space, her independence. She started remembering what it felt like to be in a home where she wasn't constantly being evaluated. She started realizing that love should not feel like imprisonment. And then, the relationship entered its final phase. The phase where every conversation feels like a negotiation, every day feels like a countdown, and the couple starts acting like strangers who share a history instead of partners who share a future. Jenny became more direct. She started asking Sumit questions she used to avoid. Are you willing to leave with me? Are you willing to choose us? Are you willing to live separately from them? Sumit would dodge. He would say he needed time. He would say it was complicated. He would say he loved her. But his love always came with conditions. Jenny finally said something she had been afraid to say out loud. Your love doesn't protect me. Sumit looked hurt. He said, That's not true. Jenny replied, Then why am I the only one bleeding? That line stayed between them like a ghost. And this is where the story becomes even more intense, because once Jenny stops begging for acceptance, the dynamic shifts. The family feels threatened. Sumit feels pressured. Jenny feels cornered. And when people feel cornered, they do things that change everything. In the next section, the emotional war becomes a decision war, and Jenny starts making moves that shock everyone in that household. She stops acting like the guest who needs permission. She starts acting like a woman who will not disappear quietly. And that's where Jenny stopped waiting for permission to exist. The realization that she could not survive much longer inside a life built entirely around someone else's approval settled deep in her chest like a quiet storm preparing to break. 4 years she had been patient, respectful, and hopeful. She had tried to earn acceptance, tried to prove her worth, tried to show that love could coexist with tradition. But now, something inside her had shifted. The woman who once arrived in India with wide eyes and a heart full of dreams was slowly being replaced by someone stronger, someone who understood that survival sometimes meant walking away from the very thing you fought hardest to protect. The morning after that tense family conversation, Jenny woke up earlier than usual. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the room, noticing every detail as if seeing it for the first time. The small table by the window, the curtains she had chosen herself, the photographs of her and Sumit smiling during happier days. Each item told a story, but now those stories felt distant, like memories belonging to someone else. Sumit was still asleep, his breathing steady, his face peaceful in a way that almost hurt Jenny to look at. She loved him. That was the tragedy of it all. If she didn't love him so deeply, leaving would have been easy. But love has a way of complicating every decision, turning simple choices into emotional battles that leave scars long after the moment has passed. Jenny quietly stood up and walked into the kitchen. The apartment was silent. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat alone at the table, staring at the steam rising from the cup. Her thoughts moved in circles. How long could she keep living like this? How much more of herself was she willing to sacrifice? And the question that scared her most, if she stayed, would she eventually lose herself completely? When Sumit finally woke up, he found her sitting there, calm but distant. He sensed immediately that something had changed. Jenny looked at him with a steady gaze and said, "We need to talk." Those 4 words carried a weight that filled the entire room. Sumit sat down across from her, his expression tense. He had heard those words before, but this time felt different. This time, Jenny's voice was not emotional or pleading. It was clear, controlled, and determined. "I can't keep living like this," she said quietly. Sumit tried to respond, but Jenny gently raised her hand, asking him to listen first. "I left my home, my country, my comfort, everything for us. I did it because I believed we were building a life together. But what we have right now, it's not a life. It's survival." Sumit's eyes softened with sadness. He reached for her hand, but Jenny kept both of his wrapped around her cup. "I need to know something," she continued. "Not later. Not someday. Now. Are you willing to build a life with me that doesn't depend on your parents' approval?" The question hung between them like a test neither of them wanted, but both knew was necessary. Sumit looked down, his fingers tracing invisible patterns on the table. He loved Jenny. He truly did. But the weight of his family's expectations pressed down on him like a constant reminder of who he was supposed to be. "It's not that simple," he finally said. Jenny closed her eyes briefly, as if bracing herself for impact. "It is that simple," she replied. "You just don't want it to be." The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument they had ever had. It was the kind of silence that forces truth to the surface. Sumit's mind raced with conflicting thoughts. He imagined a life where he left everything behind for Jenny. A small apartment somewhere far from the judgment of his family. A fresh start built purely on love. But then he imagined his parents' faces. Their disappointment. Their pain. The idea of being seen as the son who abandoned his duty. He felt trapped between 2 worlds that refused to coexist. "I need time," he said softly. Jenny nodded slowly, but her eyes revealed a deeper understanding. Time was something she had already given in abundance. Time had not solved anything. Time had only prolonged the inevitable. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the house shifted. Jenny moved with a quiet confidence that surprised everyone. She stopped trying to anticipate criticism. She stopped trying to prove herself. Instead, she focused on her own peace. She began spending more time alone, going for walks, making phone calls to friends back in America, reconnecting with parts of her life that had been pushed aside. Sumit's parents noticed the change immediately. Where Jenny had once been cautious and eager to please, she now carried herself with a calm detachment. It unsettled them. They were used to a version of Jenny who reacted emotionally, who tried to negotiate her place within the family. This new Jenny did not argue. She did not explain. She simply existed on her own terms. One evening, Sumit's mother approached her in the living room. "You seem different," she said, her tone neutral but observant. Jenny looked up from the book she was reading and offered a polite smile. "I'm just thinking about my future," she replied. The answer was simple, but it carried an underlying message that did not go unnoticed. That night, Sumit's parents had a long conversation with him behind closed doors. Jenny could hear the muffled voices from the other room, the rise and fall of tones that suggested serious discussion. She did not try to listen closely. For the first time, she felt strangely detached from the outcome. When Sumit finally came back into their room, his face looked pale. He sat on the bed and stayed at the floor. Jenny waited patiently. After a long pause, he spoke. "They think we should consider what's best for everyone." Jenny felt a familiar ache in her chest, but she remained composed. "And what do you think is best for everyone?" she asked gently. Sumit struggled to find the words. "I don't want to hurt anyone," he said. Jenny's lips curved into a faint, bittersweet smile. "Sometimes not choosing is still a choice," she replied. The next few weeks unfolded like a slow-moving storm. Conversations became more serious. The possibility of separation, once unthinkable, began to feel real. Jenny started looking into practical matters. Travel options, legal documents, financial arrangements. Each step felt surreal, like preparing for the end of a chapter she had once believed would last forever. Sumit watched her with a growing sense of panic. He realized that Jenny was no longer threatening to leave out of frustration. She was quietly preparing for it. One evening, he finally broke down. "Don't go," he said, his voice shaking. Jenny looked at him with tears in her eyes. "Then give me a reason to stay," she whispered. The truth was painful. Sumit loved her, but he could not give her the life she deserved. And Jenny loved him, but she could not continue living as a secondary priority in her own marriage. The day they finally made the decision was calm, almost eerily peaceful. There were no dramatic arguments, no shouting, just two people sitting together, acknowledging what they had been avoiding for too long. "Maybe love isn't always enough," Jenny said softly. Sumit nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. They held each other for a long time, both aware that this moment marked the end of something deeply meaningful. The divorce that followed was not filled with bitterness. It was filled with quiet sadness and the understanding that sometimes two people can love each other deeply and still not be able to build a life together. On January 15th, their marriage officially ended. Sumit eventually moved forward with the path his family had always envisioned for him. Jenny, heartbroken but resilient, left India to rebuild her life. But this was not the end of her story. In many ways, it was the beginning of a new chapter defined not by sacrifice, but by self-discovery. And in the next part of this unfolding narrative, we explore what happened after the cameras stopped rolling. How Jenny rebuilt herself after the heartbreak. How Sumit faced the consequences of his choices. And how a love story that once captivated millions continued to echo long after it ended.